Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. I'm Susan Gannon, Acting Director of the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. Our office organizes research days every year. I'm very happy to have a full house here, and I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jeff Toney.
Good morning. How's everybody? Good. This is one of my favorite days of the year because it's a chance for us to celebrate the wonderful projects that our students do with faculty. You're going to see today almost 500 student participation in research projects ranging from arts and humanities to STEM, all the fields. I'm especially happy that we have high schools represented here, so when I recognize you, I'd like to give you a shout out and we should recognize your presence. We have Asbury Park represented. I'm not sure if they're here yet. We have Kenilworth High School, Elizabeth High School, and Hillside High School. All right. And I understand that Superintendent Dr. Gales is here, so thank you for coming. So, what's especially great about having the high school students here is that you represent the class of 2021, 2024. That is our future. My hope is that many of you will consider Kane because here we really value student learning as the core purpose of what we do. Everything we do is focused on student learning, nurturing your creativity. And I want each and every one of you in this room to be inspired by today to find what is your true passion. I want you to ask yourself, what is that one thing that really excites you? If you find that, then we will have succeeded. So with no further ado, I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Hannah Donovan. She is a design and product leader who has been building consumer experience in music, entertainment, and media for over a decade. She currently works at Twitter. How many of you are on Twitter? At least a few of you. So make sure that you are tweeting this event and sharing all the great things that are happening. Hannah has delivered new designs and creative vision for a changing music landscape, where she led product and design team at drip.com, which is now a part of Kickstarter. I'm sure you're familiar with the crowdfunding site. She also worked as vice president of design at Ripcord, a new venture creative technology studio with Viacom Music Group. She helped lead the design strategy to realize a vision of storytelling that united technology and content. In addition to being a designer, she's also an entrepreneur. Very important. Many of you know that we really value innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship here. She is the co-founder of This Is My Jam, which is a community of over 200,000 musicians, music lovers, and DJs that's home to over 2 million carefully handpicked songs. So you should check that out on the website. Hannah is actually a classically trained cellist, and she tells me she's been playing cello since she was 3 years old, if you can imagine that. She earned a Bachelor of Design and Visual Communication Design with distinction from University of Alberta, and she has spoken internationally about the intersection of design, music, and technology. I love the idea that she's bringing together these disparate areas, so it's a lesson for our students that sometimes your path can take unexpected turns. So today she's going to share some real-world tips about how to, and I'm sure that she's going to inspire us. So let's welcome Hannah.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be here. All right, is this mic on? Can you hear me? No? Yes? Yeah, now you can? Wonderful. Before we dim the lights to see these slides, I just have to ask you all if we can take a selfie because this is the most beautiful audience I've ever seen. So everybody smile for the camera. Okay, great. All right, put the phone down. Okay. Can we get the house lights down just a little bit so you can see the slides a bit more? Awesome. Maybe. Okay. Cool. It is such a pleasure to be here today. I'm so excited. I have to tell you, first of all, you are a beautiful audience. You got up early in the morning to come hear me speak, which is kind of wild. And oh, that's perfect. And also, students are my favorite audience to talk to because I have so much that I can learn from you. So I really hope that we can have a great conversation afterwards. We're going to have a quick Q&A. Please ask me questions. Don't be shy. I'm pretty chill. And also afterwards, if you want to hang out and talk more, I'm going to be around. I hope that we can exchange all sorts of information. Please, if you're in the back, come on up and come sit down. Don't be shy. It's actually more fun up here. There's better energy, and you can see me. And I don't know. It's good. Honestly, if you're ever on stage in the future, you want to have people in the front because it's good. It's like good vibes up here. All right. So today I'm going to be talking to you about designing the future of content, and I use the word content really loosely because I mean you all know about content these days and content creators and like making things on the internet and how important it is, but also it's really everything that we consume. And I also use the word design really loosely because it's really just a way for us to express ourselves, whether we're working in technology, whether we're developing, whether we're writing copy, whether we're making things for other people. Design thinking is a big part of what we do when we invent the future. It's a discipline that allows us to think beyond what exists today and imagine something new. So whether you consider yourself a designer or not, it's not really about that today. It's more about these broad concepts and terms. Cool? Good. All right. So I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Hannah. You can call me Han. I'm also at Han most places on the internet, including Twitter and Instagram, if you want to hit me up there and say hi. Or if you use Snapchat, I'm Ms. Hannah Donovan. I love talking to people, so please say hi. I won't bite. Also, a few quick things about me, besides being a designer and an entrepreneur. I like tigers, and they're my spirit animal because, well, they're orange and fluffy like me. And they have lots of patterns, just like me. And also, they really like water, just like me. In fact, did you know that tigers are the only big cat that can swim? Fun fact for today. Yep, totally. You can tweet that. Also, I want to introduce you to someone else that I'm going to talk about today, someone who has an amazing legacy and is somebody that I really admire and look up to, and that person is Prince. Also, it's really early in the morning. Do we have Prince fans in the audience? Woo! Nice. Okay, good. I was a little bit like, oh God, they're young. Maybe they don't know Prince. Okay, good. Everybody knows Prince. Good, because Prince defined like a whole generation of music. Let's just be honest. He basically invented like everything like good. So we're going to talk about Prince today. Also, it's really early in the morning, and I feel like a whole hour of me talking to you about design and technology is like a lot. So we're going to take some Prince breaks today, okay? Just to have some moments for Prince. But the reason I put him up there, the reason that I love Prince and that I'm so inspired by him is that he is a real true leader in the sense that he was not afraid to be himself. And in fact, he inspired so many people out there to also just be themselves, to wear what they want to wear, to blur the lines with music and gender and everything. And this is an incredible, incredible thing. And the reason I want to point this out to you today, at this moment in your life, is because as you stand here on the cusp of starting your professional career, you're probably going to feel sometimes like you're under pressure to conform, because this is a dumb thing that adults do. Don't do it. It's really boring. You're going to feel like you're under pressure to like wear, I don't know, like a suit to your office or organize your resume in a certain way or like say certain things. And this is boring. This is not what the future is all about. The future is about self-expression and inventing new things. I put Prince up here as an icon of somebody who is unafraid to just unabashedly be himself all the time and create new things and new culture that left a legacy and a mark on this planet. And also, the reason that I talk about self-expression is because though I've done a lot of different things in my career, the one thread that really runs through all of it is self-expression. It's something that I'm super passionate about, and it's something that I try and bring to every project I work on, to bring to other people, and to bring to the workplace. So, we'll talk about Prince today. All right, but getting back to the presentation here at hand, you're probably wondering, I always say that I design for desires, not needs. So let's just unpack that for a minute. So a lot of times in design, we talk about solving problems. And this is true. Designers do solve problems, but we solve them beautifully. And the thing about solving problems often is, you may have heard this if you've been exposed to anything to do with like product or design, is that we have to look for a need and then solve for it, right? Solving for a user need. Now, it's true, there are needs in the world, and there are people that solve for them, and that's a wonderful thing. I'm actually not one of those people, because everything that I've ever made is all about solving things that people just want, not things that people really need. And I want to point this out because I think when I was your age, I really struggled with this, actually. I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe I should be the kind of designer that goes to work for like an NGO or something, or figures out how to bring people clean water, or figures out how to deal with all of these things that we have problems with on our planet, like saving tigers, for instance. And I felt like this tremendous guilt around like wanting to do something that really helped the world and do something transformative with my career, and then I just ended up working in music and entertainment over and over and over again. And it wasn't until I was having this conversation one night over drinks with my friend in London, and he had just come back from a very intense trip in the Middle East where he'd been doing some really serious work there, and I was like, oh, you know, like I just feel like my career can hardly compare to yours, like you're really doing something that helps people. And he was like, Hannah, listen. He's like, I would not be able to do what I do if it wasn't for music, if it wasn't for things that made me laugh, if it wasn't for all of these fun things too, because that's what gives me hope to carry me through some of these really intense missions that I'm on. And I was like, wow, that made me feel a lot better about it, and made me realize that like there's a place for everything in this world, and it's okay to make things that people want as well. But I like to put that up there up front because it took me like years to figure this out, and so that's like a little nugget of wisdom for you today as you think about what you want to do with your life. All right, also I just really like fun. Here's me and some of my sisters. I have 5 younger sisters. We have a lot of fun. Okay, so I worked for Last.fm back in the day. It was a big music streaming service before Spotify was the first big streaming service. And then after that, I started my own music company called This Is My Jam, which you know about. I worked for MTV for a bit inside the Viacom Music Group here in New York. And then I also led product and design at Drip, which got acquired by Kickstarter. And actually most recently, which we're not going to talk about today, but I most recently have been at Vine. So my whole career has been in designing experiences for music and entertainment. I've worked a lot with recommendations. If any of you are interested in big data or neural networks or deep learning or any of this stuff, I've done a lot of work in that as well, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. Self-expression, of course, you know, Prince. And lastly, social connections. I'm going to talk a lot about how we connect with people because that's a really important thing that we need today too. So that's going to be the premise of this talk. Let's have fun. I want to start by telling you a secret, okay? So here's my secret. My secret is actually that despite working in music and entertainment, I actually grew up with no television. True story. Which for being a child of the 80s is kind of wild because like TV was where everything cool happened because we didn't really have the internet yet. Like all the cool stuff was on MTV. And it's kind of actually wild that they ever let me in their office. So instead what I did is my sisters and I would like dress up and make our own videos, and I got a handheld camera when I was a kid. It was actually my dad's. I was not supposed to be using it. I found it and unwrapped it, took it out of the box. It was still sealed, you know, it was for making like home videos like at Christmas and stuff. Took it out of the box and like ran around the neighborhood using this thing. And he got back from work and he was so angry at me because this thing is like really expensive camera, right? Yeah, I was in a lot of trouble. But then he looked at the videos and he was like, actually, this is kind of cool what you're making. So he was like, all right, we'll strike a deal. You can use this to make stuff, but if you break it, you buy it. I was about 11 years old. And that was where I started making things, really, and making things in TV and stuff like that. So I tell you this story, this little secret, because, well, a couple of reasons. We're going to get into it in this talk. But also because it should really hopefully be an inspiration about, like, it doesn't matter where you come from, or what background you have, or what you had growing up. You can always change these things later. And that's exactly what I did. I actually had to acquire a lot of knowledge, which was kind of fun. And this ended up becoming a strength instead of like, you know, an issue for me. And so I got really, really good at like acquiring TV from my friends. So I'd like go over to their house and I'd watch like 5 minutes of it and I'd be like, okay, cool. I've got the entire plot and I know all the cast of Full House or The Cosby Show. I've got it. It's like locked in my brain. I know these are old shows because I was, you know, I'm old. And that would be enough. That one little snippet of television that I would watch would be like enough for me to like be cool at school and like have a conversation at recess, because like if you don't know what's going on with these shows, you would like, you know, you'd be completely out of the loop. It was like not cool. So I got really good at that. And what was interesting is that 5 minutes of material was just enough context, important word, context, for me to be able to connect and also have just a little bit of perspective to participate. And those 3 words I'm going to talk about in this talk a lot. But as you can imagine, as a designer, this also meant I had to get a lot of extra education about film and TV and movies and stuff, because when you grow up without that, it's like that's your whole world of pop culture. How do you exist? How do you like make cool looking things? So I'm going to tell you a quick story about this. I was living in London. I had moved there to go work for Last FM, and way back in the day, 2008, long time ago, before Netflix existed, there was something called Love Film, and it was like the precursor to Netflix. They would actually mail you a DVD, you would get it, you'd watch it, and you'd put it back in the mail. So I was using this, and I had asked my friend, who's a huge film nerd, to just like fill up my Love Film account with like all of the best movies that I should ever watch. I was just like, give them all to me. And none of them had, I didn't know what any of them were, like no context, important word, okay? And I was, it was like a Sunday afternoon in London. I'd just been to the pub with some friends. I got back and it was like raining and dark and stormy outside. I was like, gross, I'm gonna stay in and watch a film, right? Perfect. So I'm like, put in this DVD, I have no idea what it is. Stick it in, start watching it. And I'm like, yeah, it looks like this. So the packaging, I have no idea what it is. There's no picture, there's no title. It doesn't even have like a poster, no imagery, no reference. It's kind of weird. It's like walking into a movie theater without knowing what you're gonna see. And I start watching this like crazy, crazy thing. It's like futuristic, and it's taking place in some like whole new world that kind of looks like Hong Kong, but it isn't really. And there's like robot people and androids like flying around, and it's super intense. And it's like, it's one of the most beautiful, stunning films I've ever seen in science fiction. Does anybody know what film I'm talking about? Yeah? Pardon? Blade Runner. Blade Runner, exactly. I was watching Blade Runner, and I had no idea that I was watching Blade Runner. That's actually like a really weird environment to be in. So I like turn it off, I like stop it, I'm like, whoa, hang on, back up. Like we need to just like take a minute here. And I look it up on Wikipedia and I'm like, whoa, this was like one of the greatest science fiction films that was ever made. And now it happens to be my favorite film. But I'm gonna use the film Blade Runner today to talk about those 3 words that I mentioned earlier, which is that content without context is really meaningless. Like, I didn't have any context for Blade Runner. I knew it looked beautiful and spectacular and interesting, but like the content was getting totally lost on me to the point that I had to like turn it off and like find out what this was all about before I kept going. Secondly, the content without any kind of connection is really irrelevant. Like not knowing when something was made or how it connects to my life or my friends or my world is just like, why would I watch this, right? That's the first most important question of anything that we make for people is like, why? Why would I watch this? That's the question I ask today when I walk in this auditorium, like, why would you want to listen to me? What do I have to share with you? And lastly, content without perspective has no feeling, because perspective is really what pulls at our heart and says like, I have a point of view about this. I want to consider this in a certain way. And so now we're in this world where content is really, really easy to access, right? You all grew up in this world of like, you can pull up your phone and you can watch whatever you want, you can listen to whatever you want, you can see whatever you want. The world didn't used to be like that, but it is now, and it's amazing. And recommendations make it increasingly easy to surface this stuff for you too, so you can get personalized streams of all these things if you want to. But the next design challenge lies in this experience around the content. Now that we have it, and now that it's so easy to get for people, because that was a whole challenge in itself, now that we have that, it's the experience around the content. That's what people pay for, we say in the industry, or that's what is going to make people come back to the product or make it stick. And so in whatever you're doing out there, whether it's creating something right now today or creating something in the future, you can think about this experience. Now, before I go on, I just want to pause and ask the audience here, how many of you are currently interested in or focusing on being an engineer or a developer? Hands? Okay, a few of you. What about being a designer or an animator or something like that? Cool. Copy or like content? Does anyone want to go into writing? No? Writing, like being a copywriter, being a content strategist? A few of you? Okay, cool. And what else? I know there's some health and science people here as well. Yeah? A couple of hands? Cool. Did I miss anything? Just shout out what you're interested in if I missed it. Psychology, music, cool. I love those things too. Great. Okay, so we have a really diverse full house here of disciplines. So as you think about this, the experience around the content in what you make, you might actually be the person that's making the thing. You might be the person who ends up coding the thing. You might be the person that ends up writing the words around it to make it make sense for people. But this can apply to all of the disciplines we just talked about. So let's start talking about content. Just really quickly, quick primer. I'm talking about like stuff that people write, like an article in the New York Times. I'm talking about stuff that people create, so like user-generated content it's called, right? I'm also talking about data too. This is also important, like the numbers, that's content in itself as well, like knowing, like how many like plays something has. That's also a form of content. It shows us what's relevant. So now that we've got that out of the way, I'm going to tell you a quick story about the history of the music industry, which maybe some of you will be familiar with and maybe some of you won't be, but let's go for it. So quick history, just to give you some practical examples here. When I first started working in music, way, way, way back in the day, when I was like using Napster in high school and discovered how much I love hip hop, access was the problem because we lived in places where we didn't have access to music. I grew up in northwestern Canada where like I didn't have access to the music that I wanted to listen to. I know, mind-blowing, right? There was a world like that once upon a time. I come from a place where people wear non-ironic cowboy boots. I was not into that kind of music at all, okay? And so when Napster came around, I was like, this is amazing. How come I have never heard of these records before? And so access was the first problem that we had to solve, and we had to figure out how to make that legal and all of those good things. And around 2008, the shift happened, and instead of access, because we had all of this music to listen to, right? All of this content out there, it instead became about discovery. How do I find the right stuff? The experience around the content. How do I find the right music that I want to listen to? How is it contextualized? Why does it matter to me? All of those things. And that's sort of the zone that we've been in since 2008. We've been really focused on discovery. And another way to think about this, as we go back to thinking about designing for desires, is that really, the first one is about like, I want this thing now. Like, just give it to me. Like, I want to type in a search box, give me this song. That was actually a very hard problem to solve, but it got solved. And that's something like search. It's very what we call in design goal-driven, important word if you're taking notes, goal-driven. Users either want to do something because they really want to take action, or what's kind of like, on-demand streaming, these kinds of things. Sometimes I think about this, if you've ever been to one of those sushi restaurants or seen a video of this where like it goes along the conveyor belt in Japan. It's really funny if you ever see a video of this on YouTube. It's kind of like that. It's like, cool, I'll just take one of these, please. And that's kind of like a relatively easy, not easy, but more straightforward technical challenge to solve. But this other problem here over here of what I call the void is like kind of guessing, like what do people want? Like I want something to listen to, but I'm not really sure what I want. Like I don't really know. I mean, I guess I want something like chill or laid back. I don't know, just give me something. And that is actually the mindset that people are in more often than not. Like sometimes, sure, you have a song that you're like, I really want to listen to this right now, right? But other times you're just like, I don't know, give me something. Let's see what's happening right now. And that is a much more difficult problem for us to solve in technology because we have to sort of guess what do the people want. And that's where we use all sorts of things about their tastes and recommendations to try and figure it out. And these are patterns that we call usually aimless browsing in this world. And with every product that you make, a way to think about it is you need to satisfy a goal-driven action, and you need to satisfy an aimless browsing-driven action. Always keeping those two things in balance. Often products fail because they only do one or the other. Like, there's only a way to search for things, and there's no way to just like get stuff if you like it. Or it's the other way around. You can like browse stuff, but there's no way to get it if you want it right now. Netflix is a great example of this. Both of those things at the same time, right? Search and you've got like movies scrolling by at the same time. Recommendations. I also like to think of this, if you've ever heard, to go back to my sushi metaphor for a minute. It's actually kind of early in the morning for sushi, but omakase, if you've ever seen a picture of this, it's where they like make it for you and give it to you. It's a little bit more guessing what the person might like and then putting it together. So to come back to the music industry here, one of these problems is about like when I know exactly what I want. I already have these three things, right? Let's say I want to listen to a track. Let's say I get home tonight and I'm like, I really want to put on Bad and Bougie, right? I already have the context for that track. I already have a connection to it, and I already have some perspective about that particular thing. So it's easy for me to figure out that's what I want to listen to. But when I don't know what I want, when I actually have no clue, I'm just like, hey, give me something, that's when I need these three things. These three things are exactly what we need to offer people. And this is what the next generation of people that is working on content right now are trying to figure out how to offer this stuff. And these things are squishier. They're like much more difficult to try and get across than just the thing itself. Like, why would you like this thing? What's your connection to it? And here's some perspective on this particular thing. So let's talk about that problem, because knowing what we want is really, really hard. In fact, most of the time we don't even know what we want as people, much less what we think someone else might want. And actually, just like a quick break here, I think that like us humans, what we're really good at is just knowing what we don't like, not what we do like. This is kind of a good thing to think about, I think, at this point in your life, as you think about your career and what you want to do next. People might ask you what you want to do, and sometimes it's really hard to figure that out. So what I do is I make a list of all the things that I hate and use that as a compass to point me in the direction of the things that I do like. And as I get older, I just add things to the list of stuff I don't like, and that keeps on pointing me in that direction. But to get back to what I'm talking about at hand, it's just like this void piece here, trying to figure out how to offer people something that they might desire, which is what we're dealing with right now in technology, in consumer-facing tech, is it really requires this context, it requires this connection, and it requires this perspective. These three things that I didn't have when I was watching Blade Runner. If we don't have these three things, it's really meaningless, and it's really hard to connect to, and it doesn't make any sense at all. It's this experience layer that wraps all of this content together and sets these products apart. And that's where designers and technologists and content strategists and copywriters are all working together really hard to try and figure out what that fabric is that holds it together. So to go back to like my quick lesson of the music industry really fast, we're going to finish this history lesson. If you go back to like 2012 here, there was this really funny thing that started to happen, because we started to figure out how to make really good recommendation algorithms to serve things up to people so that they can see what they want. And in the music industry, everybody was kind of battling around like, is this, human curation, or is this the computer that's going to do this, right? You can see how this would get really gnarly really fast. And we talked about this in 2012. This is from South by, which is a huge conference where a lot of these topics get debated. And then, it happened again in 2013, same exact topic here. It's like man versus machine. I don't like that word, man. People versus machine. 2014, same thing again. This time it's the Beats Music CEO talking about it. And like Apple is quite famous for their human curated playlists. Spotify is quite famous for their algorithmically generated ones. It's like 4 years on, we're still debating this. And here is my answer for you on this topic. this is quite important, I think, to our future, which is that humans can really connect us in ways that computers can't. We can all be here together today in this room, and we can connect with each other. We can have a conversation in a way that we never, ever would be able to have on the internet. But at the same time, computers can really connect us in all sorts of ways that humans can't, right? Like there's all sorts of ways for us to stay in touch after this talk, for example, that never would have existed previously. And so it's really a combination of both of these things. The best products out there, they use both. They use the power of computers to figure out how to connect people together, and they also use human perspective. And it's this human perspective piece that is starting to become a really hot topic right now in technology, especially as we talk about AI systems and think about what our future feels like as we actually train these computers to think and act more like ourselves, make decisions the way that we would make decisions. And this also requires crafting really balanced teams, whether it's in projects that you do in school or in the workplace, that have people that can think about the emotional human side of things as well as the technological side of things, which is why I'm so happy to see acronyms like STEAM become STEAM, because we're including this aspect of the arts in what we do in technology that's so fundamentally important to our future. And there's no better example than this, actually, than House of Cards, right? So this was a show that was basically created to serve to people exactly what they wanted. Netflix looked at all of the viewing data of like who their audience is, what kind of stories they're interested in, and they used that data to create a whole new show that they figured people would like. And then they took it to a bunch of writers, creative people, and they're like, this is what the data says, can you write us something around this? This was the first time it ever happened. And since then, a lot of shows have happened this way. We've seen an explosion of growth around this kind of connection between data and perspective. All right, that's a lot of stuff. I just packed your brain with like so many concepts. So we're going to take a quick breather for Prince. Did you guys know that Prince wrote 39 studio albums? Like, let's just pause and have a minute for like that. That's crazy. And like, he didn't even live that long. Like, that is so much output. All right. Okay, Prince, let's talk about context now, since we've talked about content. So as I said earlier, context is really what makes the content meaningful. It's like the wrapper around the content that makes it meaningful. And one of my favorite designers, Mark Bolton, he says that on its own, content is actually pretty dumb until someone designs some kind of smart system around it and displays it in the right context, right? For example, we were just talking about Netflix. It wouldn't actually be that useful to you if someone hadn't taken all those movies and TV shows and put them into some kind of experience that made them easy to browse and easy to look at. And in music, actually, this is a really challenging problem. So just to give you a glimpse into the world of what I deal with sometimes, we have all sorts of different metadata all over the shop on all of these different platforms. And whoa, does it get crazy. You've got long names, you've got names in different languages, you've got different characters, you've got remixes and classical music, and all sorts of crazy stuff, and people that title their songs in ways that you did not expect. Music is really, really messy. It always has been, it always will be. It's one of the things that makes it really beautiful. And it's a very messy place to deal with. So I'm going to tell you really quickly a little bit, sort of another glimpse into the work that I do, how we take that kind of mess and we turn it into something that's usable. So adding some kind of smart system around the content to make it relatable. And sometimes I call this, and has anyone here actually, I know there's not that many developers in the audience, but has anyone ever worked with an API before? A couple of you? Okay, so API is something where you can basically say like, hey, I'd like some data please, and it's like cool, and it opens up a door once you stick a key in, like it gives you the data, basically. But sometimes it gives you that data in like kind of a way that you didn't expect it to be, and so you have to take it and you need to sort of like organize it into a fashion where you can actually use it. And that's often what happens here in music when we get those titles of tracks and stuff so we can actually work with them, they're kind of messy. And I always say to people that if you get handed a little bit of a mess, it's your job to turn it into something that is usable. And often when we get the API, I have this term for it, I call it API vomit. You can't leave it like that. You can't just leave it on the screen. You need to take it and clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about working with this. So when I was working on This Is My Jam, we were pulling in YouTube from their API, so we're getting the data from YouTube. The thing about YouTube is, though, that their thumbnails really suck. So whoever designed their API for their images, I don't know, it's old or they didn't think about this, and they're really small and they're really crappy and pixelated and they look awful, right? So here we have Billie Holiday, the original here, and she looks really bad. So I was like, all right, how do we take this and do something cool with it? So as a designer, I'm like, well, first, let's just correct the levels, right? Let's get some nice blacks and whites happening there. Simple, easy job. You can run it through an offline script, and you can make all of these things look a lot better. And then I was like, well, we still have some bad sort of JPEG compression and pixelation here, so let's add some film grain texture to it, because that kind of smooths it all out and makes it look a lot better. So now that we have this initial thing that we work with, so that was the cleanup that I did just to get to something that was usable and workable. These are the kinds of steps that we take in technology to make things happen and make things look presentable and beautiful for you. Then after that, I was like, well, we still have this tiny little thumbnail, and that kind of sucks. And I want to do something that's full screen and really visual and really beautiful for music, because at the time, music still kind of looked like a spreadsheet. And honestly, I think it still kind of does. And it was just a row of tracks. And I wanted something that had more visuals and more emotional content around it. So I was like, how about we take some ideas from what was happening in street culture and pop culture at the time. I was living in London. There was a lot of stuff with I don't know, geometric shapes, and this blur bokeh thing was going on. It was kind of cool. So I sat down with the developer I was working with, and we did some figured out how we could actually kind of generate this stuff on the fly. And we were working with these kaleidoscope patterns here in this particular case, and drawing out what the math would look like for that. So you can take an image and flip it around, and anyway, this is what we made. So we took that one crappy image and turned it into something really nice looking, and then added these filters on top so that people could take their music and do a bunch of different beautiful things with them. And this was back in 2011, so this was well before Snapchat filters or some of the other things that you might be used to today. And I put this in here because it's just an example of how quickly things change. That was only 6 years ago. And just last week at F8, they're talking about insane AR filters, or the new ones that Snapchat released yesterday are incredible. This is only 6 years of technology. That's the pace that things move at. We're going from putting filters on static images to rainbows bouncing around in the sky on top of our videos in 6 years. Anyway, this is what ended up happening. You could take your music and you could apply all sorts of different filters to it. And this is an example of how we take that content and we add some more context to it to make it a little bit more meaningful. And people could share their favorite song like this and say, hey, this is my jam. This is what I'm really into. And as this happened, over time, they added some words and they added some art to it. And it was really the first time that you could ever really do this with music. And just to close this concept here, here's an example of it playing out in the real world as well. So I live in Brooklyn, near the Marcy Ave stop. And one morning, I think it was a really crisp fall morning, I was looking out and I was like, oh, this is just one of those beautiful New York mornings where it's warm, slightly sunny morning you're going to get before it snows. And it was that golden light. And I pull open the New York Times on my phone to check the news. And it says to me right there, it's good morning, here's what you need to know to start your day here. And I'm like, cool, that's a nice little bit of context, right? The newspaper is talking to me. It knows that it's morning time. Just that one simple little bit of context goes a long, long way. And then as I go into this particular story about sharks, because I really like sharks, it says, good morning on this Golden Friday. I was like, wow, some copywriter got to the newsroom that early and was like, it is a golden day in New York. I'm going to stick this little line of copy into a newspaper that's just aware of where I am, based on my geolocation, where I'm standing, where my phone is. And this might seem like a really trivial, simple concept to you, because we all carry our phones around all the time, and why shouldn't it know where I am? But actually, when you're working on this stuff with a team of hundreds of people, to get a tiny little change like that into an app and have it see the light of day is very, very difficult. And sometimes All it takes is just a simple idea like that, like, hey, let's just be aware of where people are and what time of day it is, and like stick that in, write a bit of copy, write a bit of code to make it work. It can make all the difference to the end user, me, standing on that train platform, feeling like I'm more connected to New York City and I'm more connected to that morning than I would be if I didn't have that. And so I tweeted about it, obviously. I was like, thanks, New York Times, you're right, it is a really golden Friday. And then later that night, when I was coming home on the train, I'm like, oh, cool, my nighttime read. And I was reading an article about Rauschenberg, an artist that I really like, not something I'd read in the morning. The New York Times is also being really aware of the fact that in the morning I want to read something in 5 minutes, super quickly, and in the evening I might be more willing to read a longer article. So sometimes just adding a little bit of time and place to the things that we make can make a huge difference. All right. Prince break. Does anybody know what the first major R&B hit was with no bass line? So I want you to think about those words for a second. R&B, no bass line. Rhythm and bass, right? No bass line. Does anyone know what it was? When Doves Cry. You should go listen to it. No bass line. It's incredible. It was the first thing to top the charts without a bass line. All right. So connection is the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and then we can all go get a cup of coffee or have a chat. So connection is what makes content relevant. So to go back to that Blade Runner story, because I had no connection to it, because it wasn't 1982 or whatever when that film was made, when I was watching it, it was really hard for me to feel connected to it. And one of my favorite design duos of all times, this quote is attributed to Charles Eames, but let's be honest, it was really Charles and Ray Eames here. They said that the quality of the connections is the key to the quality per se. Just think about that for a little bit, what that means. It's that actually the quality in a design is all about how you connect to it and how you think about how people are going to connect with the thing that you make. Because everybody has a different idea about what stuff is. This is just like a picture of a mood board for some project that I was working on at like a job, and we were thinking about like what cats mean to different people and what queens mean to different people, and everybody's connection to something is different because we all come from a different place. You can't assume that you know what that connection is. And so that's one of the things that we really struggle with in technology, is trying to understand, like, what is this person's connection to this thing? Because the stronger the connection is, the more meaningful the content becomes to the user. So to take you back in history again, another quick, like, this is another blast from the past. I know, this is what an iPhone used to look like in like 2010. I know, it's crazy how much it's changed, right? But the core principles are still the same. So I was working on this project. And my boss, the CEO at the time, he was like, hey, Hannah, we're going to put Last.fm radio on phones, and you need to figure out how to do this. Just like design a really great interface for it so people can use it, radio in their pocket. I was like, okay, cool. So I start working on this. And at the time, Last.fm had something called recommendation radio, because we heard from people that they needed new music to listen to. Everybody always complained, I don't have anything new to listen to, everything's old, I listen to the same songs all the time. So the developers had worked on this algorithm that just gave people new music, just new things that they'd never heard before. Makes sense, right? Who thinks that's like a logical solution? Hands? Yeah, seems reasonable. So I did what I do, which is I did some drawings and I sat down and then I started talking to people. And when I talked to people, I discovered that actually listening to new music is really exhausting. And people can really only listen to about like 3 new tracks before they're like, shut it off, this is too much for me. It's like brain overload, which actually is why top 40 radio stations play you so much stuff over and over again, because when that song comes on, you're like, oh yeah, I know this is great. And then it plays something that you don't know and you're like, oh, interesting, cool, all right. And then it's like something that you like again. It's kind of a lot like no one would want to eat a meal of like all food that they'd never tasted before maybe, or it might be kind of like a bit hard to do. You want to have something in there that you're like slightly familiar with, right? And so what I did is I was like, all right, we need to actually change the entire radio station that we're giving to people here. And so I went back to the developers and I was like, let's make this thing called my mix radio, which is just a mix of things that I already know and love and some things that I've never heard before. And sometimes, the reason I'm telling you this story is because it's like the kind of thinking that we have to do in the workplace to get our job done. I was told to design an interface. Instead, I ended up designing a radio station. That's a totally different thing. It requires totally different skills and picking up stuff and working with these developers and engineers to figure out what the right mix of music is to create that algorithm with, and renaming all these radio stations in like 13 different languages across like 3 different platforms or something like that. It was bonkers. We got it done, and it worked really well. And the reason that I'm telling you this is because what it offered to people was familiarity. It gave them that connection to the music that they needed to feel like it was important to them. And the best music recommendations, in fact, come from friends, which is no surprise, but at the time when we were thinking a lot about like, hey, how can we do this with computers, sometimes we accidentally throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we get so excited about what we can do with technology, we forget some of like the old truths about people. And so when I was working on this and interviewing people and finding out how they discovered music, and I learned this particular thing, I was like, all right, this is why I need to go start a company afterwards that is just about music that comes from friends, which is exactly what I did. Another way to think about this is if any of you know Timehop, or if you use Facebook, you'll notice how they show you like a memory sometimes. I'm not personally. This is another way that you can connect with somebody. Here's another example of it, which is just using something like time to connect to someone with a memory. So sometimes it can be as simple as that, just finding one thing. I urge you with everything that you do when you're presenting a user some kind of content, whether it's a graph or some data or some writing or a picture, think, how can I connect to them with this? What's the one thing that I could wrap around this just to help connect it a little bit more? And that particular picture of Timehop, it connects me to Berlin, which is a place where my sister lives, and it reminds me of that particular place, which is a really rad place in Teufelsberg. Hang on. And so place can also be a really easy way to do this. And when you think about what you have in your phone as you're going off in the world and making things, this is a great place to start. Like, what's all this stuff that my phone knows about me? It's where I'm standing, it's what time of day it is, it's what the weather is like, it's all of this other personal data. How do I use this in a way that can connect me? So, last Prince break, I think. Also, Prince's very, very first album, his first debut album, I think he was only 20 years old, actually, when he did this album. He played every single instrument on that album, which was 27 instruments. He recorded every single one himself. And I'm telling you that because we talked earlier when I was introduced about how important it is to work at the intersection of a lot of different disciplines. Now, Prince isn't a master of every single one of those instruments. He ended up choosing a few in his career that he really got great at. But when you're young, it's so important to try all of these different things out, which is why I really urge you at this point in your career to just be as curious as you possibly can about all of these things. Now, I know we're running a little bit short on time, so let's finish up here. This gives the content feeling. And to close, I just want to talk really quickly about this professor here, Hubert Dreyfus. He teaches at Berkeley. He's really interesting. He does a lot of work in the field of artificial intelligence. And he talks about why humans are human because they have a perspective. They care about things. And one might call it our ability to actually give a damn, right? To have a heart, to have a perspective on stuff. And decide why something matters or why something doesn't matter. It's from this book called A Moment of Clarity. And I love this particular phrase, computers can't give a damn, or at least they can't yet. We haven't trained AI systems to do this, but we're headed into that world really, really quickly. And this is where we can use our own perspective on things to think about how we present it to other people. And sometimes this is all that's required to just make a connection with people. So another project I worked on back in the day, this was with a really cool startup called Newspaper Club, which is around, you can actually print any newspaper you want through them, which is really rad. And they do it with like big newspaper printing equipment. So they found all of these old Heidelberg presses. They were going away and out of business because people don't read newspapers anymore. And they figured out how to feed them data and technology to just print whatever newspaper you want. Now anyone can print a newspaper. So I did this when I was working at Last.fm, and we printed this chart of like what the music listening tastes were like in this particular year, 2009. And we got this data visualization on here, which was really cool and beautiful, and you can sort of see like which artists are coming up and why they were popular at certain times in the year. But what we really needed on top of this, I realized, was we needed some editorial. We needed some perspective. We needed a human, a music writer, to come in and talk about, like, okay, why was it actually that Lady Gaga was really big at this particular moment, for example? And this is just a reminder here, again, about how we talk about computers and humans working together, that this kind of story and this narrative on top of things is so important, because this is what humans can offer that computers still can't offer today. Another example is, like, I just get a lot of like email newsletters that I use to find music, and I love these because it's just the perspective of that label or the perspective of that human curator that puts it together that's actually really important. I trust their taste and their judgment. This is a really funny project that I worked on, which just kind of goes to show that you can't choose how people are going to remember you by. I made this at a music hack day, which, if you know what a hack day is, it's like 24 hours. You like code really hard and you get something done. And we built this called Drinka Phi, which is still on the internet today, where you like type in what you're listening to and it tells you what to drink. And you shouldn't use it unless you're being really careful, and obviously these proportions are totally wrong, right? But that's actually what makes it really, really funny and why people actually like it. And it's like, I don't know, gone viral a bunch of times because of this. But the reason I put this in here is because it's this kind of connection to people, this extra perspective, that if we hadn't had these funny proportions, I don't think people would have actually used this website or found it interesting at all. It was that like mistake and that serendipity in how we ended up generating that algorithm that made this thing really funny. Also, you should probably not try this at home, and I probably shouldn't even be showing it to you at school. Okay, cool. So this experience of Blade Runner, to close, lacked context, it lacked connection, and it lacked perspective. But I want to tell you about an experience that I had that did have all of these things. And that was this particular one, which was different than a computer just handing me a blob of content in the dark. It was when I was in college. I was watching the Looney Tunes for the very first time ever in my life. I know, crazy, right? But my friend, who was a huge animation nerd, he was there to explain every step of the way why it mattered, what these animators were doing at the time, why these characters were really important, what I would have experienced had I had that television growing up and been watching Looney Tunes when I was 4 years old, and how so much humor builds on classics like this. And I started to understand things. I started to learn. I had the context of like why an anvil falling on somebody is actually really funny. Because if you don't know that, then it just doesn't make any sense. And an emotional connection to all of these moments in conversation and jokes and impressions, they finally lit up for me. It was so important. And this perspective to see this beautiful classic animation style, what it actually looks like. But most importantly, I had a really passionate person to take me through all of these things, and that's something that a computer can't do. And so as you go forward in your careers and you build experiences for people, I urge you to think about how do you bring a little bit of that Looney Tunes story into what you make so that you're not just handing people blobs of content in the dark from that API, but you're actually wrapping them in some kind of experience that makes it meaningful and makes it matter to them. I want to close with one of my favorite quotes about design, which is by Jack Schultz. He's an incredible designer in London. And he says here, some people, they are wrong, say that design is about solving problems. Obviously, designers, they do solve problems, right? We talked about that at the beginning. But then so do dentists. They also, fix your cavities. Design is about cultural invention. And that's why I'm giving you this talk today on design, because you are the people that are going off to create the next version of culture that we're all going to live in. And so just to finish up here with this concept of culture creation and reinventing how people connect with things, and with every industry that is going through a state of reinvention right now with this technological revolution that we're living in, I want to bring up an even older story, which is this old dude. Now, this guy, his name was Owen D. Young. And he was the chairman of a company called General Electric, which if you've looked on a light bulb, you'll see that logo, GE, or maybe on some appliances. And back in the 30s, there was this revolution that was happening in chemistry and in light, because they were moving from these tungsten filaments, if you've ever been to one of those like hipster joints with the like low lit dim lights, that's what they all used to look like, to these really bright ones where you could see all the time, which is the light bulbs that we would have grown up with, those incandescent lights in our houses. And he gave this speech on culture in 1934, actually, to a university, much like I'm doing today. And I want to quote something that he talks about here from the perspective of chemistry, which is that culture represents a synthesis, a putting together of things so completely that the combination has an individuality of its own. This may only be an amalgam, so that's when you mix two things together and they don't really stick together, but it's better if it can be a chemical combination, which means like a chemical reaction. So when you put two things together and they combust in some way, right, chemistry class, to create a whole new thing, a thing that didn't exist before. Culture does not exist in the mere form of powder, a mere mass of incoherent particles. This is what I've been talking about today. When we think about serving content to people, instead of just giving them those incoherent particles, let's think about how we can combine them with another discipline to make something completely new. Because with every single thing that we work on, we have that opportunity to bring two things together and to create a whole new kind of culture. We have an opportunity to create that kind of chemical reaction. And that is it. Thank you so much for listening. Cool. Do you still want to do questions? We can take a couple of questions really fast, and then I will be around afterwards if you want to come talk to me in person. Or we can just talk afterwards in person. Do you want to get a picture?